Thanks, John, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and as indicated already, I'm going to say a little bit about the global economics component and contribution to the larger AgMIP initiative. And we're IFPRI very happy to be part of this exercise, acknowledging also that our contribution and our participation in the larger initiative is supported by our donors, principally the CGIAR research program on policies, institutions, markets, the research program on climate change, agriculture, and food security, as well as the Gates Foundation, which jointly support a program here that Mark mentioned called Global Futures and Strategic Foresight. So our partners in this broader initiative come in two general categories. One are the global economic teams that are members of, or the modeling teams that are part of the AgMIP Global Economics Modeling Group. And those are largely based in North America and Europe. There are 10 to 15 of them, depending on availability and interest in different activities that we've done. But along with IFPRI, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, Wageningen University, the GTAP group at Purdue, and a number of others. So we're very happy to work with those, and those, as Cynthia has already mentioned, have contributed to helping us to understand better how different models and how different groups approach similar questions, and what we can learn from when our results are similar and when our results are different as well. But it's important to complement that with a different set of institutions and different set of partners that bring a different perspective. And in our case, those are the 15 centers of the CGIAR with whom we collaborate, particularly in this Global Futures and Strategic Foresight program. And the motivation there is to bring together the biophysical science work that those centers are doing. They each have their particular crop and regional mandates, but the expertise that they have in plant breeding and agronomy and soil science and so forth, together with the economic and policy modeling and analysis that we do here with IFPRI. And we think it's very valuable to bring together these two sets of partners in this type of initiative, because the challenge is certainly sufficiently large that we need all kinds of inputs and expertise in order to do that. So I'll just go briefly through a few slides to give a couple of examples of work that we have done and are doing. This is a slice similar to a graph that Cynthia showed a little bit earlier, showing how in very general terms we link results from general circulation models with crop models, and in turn with global economic models, in order to come up in the end with projections over the long term for production, consumption, prices, trade, and so forth of major agricultural commodities. So this is the methodology, the tools that we use, but in order to define those assumptions, we bring in several specific elements. One of those are the climate assumptions, representative concentration pathways, or RCPs, which are basically assumptions about how rapidly climate will change in the coming decades. And so we can look at a range of those just in order to get a sense of how sensitive our results are to the assumptions on the climate side that go into these models. Likewise, on the economic modeling side, we make similar assumptions about these so-called shared socioeconomic pathways. And these are storylines that have been developed by the global modeling community that have many dimensions, most of which we are not yet able to capture. We do incorporate, however, different assumptions about population growth and changes in income over time, as well as changes in technology, in order to give us a baseline for a productivity change in agriculture over time, against which to compare different scenarios. And from those, then the models, and along with the impact model at IFPRI, each of the other teams that we've worked with, those global economic modeling groups, have their own models that are used to run a similar set of scenarios to facilitate this type of comparison. And from those, in the end, we can take the results of those models and then work with other experts in order to see what that implies for food security, for greenhouse gas emissions, and other sorts of environmental indicators of interest as well. So to give one example, and this also mirrors a slide that Cynthia presented, this is one particular general circulation model, the AgMIP model, with one particular assumption about the rate of climate change, in this case a relatively rapid rate, RCP 8.5. And you can see in this particular case the projections in mid-century for changes in temperature on the left and changes in precipitation on the right. And those changes in temperature tend to be more consistent across GCMs, whereas the changes in precipitation are much more variable, which is a good reason to look at many of those models in an analysis like this in order to understand the variability that is possible. Those are then used as inputs into crop models, in this case the DSAT crop model for maize, in order to see at the pixel level what are the implications of those changes in, and these are the long-term trends that John alluded to, without accounting for extreme events or variability. But looking what those imply in terms of biophysical changes in yields in different parts of the world. And of course you can see quite a bit of variability, but also a lot of red in this figure. This does not account for CO2 fertilization effects, and this also importantly does not account for economic feedback effects. That's the last step in this particular chain where we do bring in the economic model results. In this case, this is just from the impact model, but we can compare those projected losses due to climate change with the projected increases that we expect over time because of changes in technology and other socioeconomic drivers. So in this case, the gray bars that you see by region, world, East Asia, Pacific, and so forth, the gray bars are the projected increase in yields for maize, in this case, in the absence of climate change. And then the different colored dots represent the changes that would be expected under different degrees of climate change, ranging from relatively low rates, the light blue dots, to the red, which is the RCP 8.5 case. And you can see it varies by region. It also varies across crops. In the case of wheat, for example, we see a different picture where particularly the higher latitudes, Europe and former Soviet Union, actually see increases in projected yields as a result of the climate scenarios. And so those balance out across regions, across commodities, and across scenarios. Shifting from some impact results to results from an ensemble of models. In this case, there are 5 global economic models in addition to the impact model. This includes the Envisage model from Purdue, Wageningen University's Magnet model, PIC's MAGPIE model, and the FARM model from the USDA Economic Research Service. Very aggregated. This is for 5 commodity groups. This completely hides the variation that we see across regions, across those commodities, and across models. But just to give an indication of the broad trends, we see yields as a result of climate change, but after incorporating these economic feedback effects, declining by 5 to 7%, depending on the particular combination of socioeconomic and climate assumptions that we put into this. Interestingly, in the middle, production, very little change relative to what we would see in 2050 without climate change. In other words, we're expecting an increase in production of about 60 to 70% for this group of commodities, and that we don't see changing a lot as a result of climate change. It doesn't change because other factors are adjusting, and you see here, for example, an increase of area harvested of about 4 to 5%, and increase in prices of about 15%. Both of those are important because they're about double the rate of change that we project in the absence of climate change. So in other words, with climate change, under these particular scenarios, we see the potential for quite significant environmental impacts as a result of land use change, increased land use change, and potentially quite significant food security impacts, not so much on the production or availability side, but on the access side as prices increase. So to go to a couple of indicators of food security and health here. These are estimates of the population at risk of hunger in different regions of the world. And when we say regions here, we're talking about the continental level, whereas the regional analysis that John was talking about, as he mentioned, was at the national and subnational level. So here in the gray, these correspond roughly to the FAO estimates of undernourished population in the world, a total of about 800 million people today. We see that declining in the absence of climate change, as indicated by the blue bars, by about half worldwide by 2050. But climate change, as indicated by the orange, increases or offsets those improvements and increases the number of people at risk of hunger, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where about half of the improvements that we would expect in the absence of climate change are actually lost because of climate change under this particular scenario, which is a middle-of-the-road socioeconomic pathway and a relatively rapid rate of climate change. One other set of brand new results. This is work that was done by a couple of our IFPRI colleagues here using the impact model linked with a health model at Oxford University and published a couple of weeks ago in The Lancet, showing changes in death related to various climate-related risk factors in 2050. And it may be difficult to read the legend, but the risk factors are underweight, changes in consumption of fruit and vegetables, changes in consumption of red meat, obesity, and so forth. And just quickly to make a couple of comparisons, in the low and middle income countries of Southeast Asia, which in this case includes South Asia, so particularly India and its neighboring countries, a large part of the change in climate-related deaths in 2050 comes from an increase in underweight as a result of climate change impacts on the availability simply of energy, of kilocalories. Whereas in Western Pacific, which in this case includes China, a big part of those changes in climate-related deaths comes from changes in the consumption of fruit and vegetables. So diet really does feed through in the health modeling analysis of Oxford into these significant changes in mortality and risk factors in 2050. It's not all on the negative side, however. Globally and across each of the regions here, there are also reductions in death rates due to reduction in red meat consumption, reductions in overweight and in obesity as well, that help to offset some of the increases due to other factors. So this is just an example of how the types of results of the global economic models in terms of production and availability and prices and so forth can feed into other models that help us to look at some of the indicators that are of more direct interest to us in terms of health and nutrition and so forth. So I'll conclude just by noting, as John has already mentioned, that there are important links that we'd like to strengthen in this next phase of AgMIP. On the one hand, better links from the results of regional analysis that can help inform the types of scenarios and analysis that are done in the global economic models, and conversely, using the results of the global economic models, for example, prices as inputs into the regional analysis, so that we can strengthen both of those with the goal not to produce a super Swiss Army knife of all tools within a single model that doesn't do any of them particularly well, but that they're complementary tools that can better inform decision making at different scales of analysis. So I'll conclude with that. Thank you very much.